In the spring of 1940, the Netherlands stood as a bastion of neutrality, a nation that had successfully navigated the turbulent waters of European politics for over a century. However, this facade of tranquility was shattered on May 10, when the German Wehrmacht launched a blitzkrieg invasion. Within days, the Dutch military, despite its valiant efforts, succumbed to the overwhelming might of the Nazi forces. The occupation that followed was not merely a military takeover, it was a profound transformation of Dutch society, economy, and identity. The swift German advance left cities like Amsterdam, Rotterdam, and The Hague under the control of the Nazi regime. Streets that once bustled with the sounds of commerce and community were now filled with the presence of German soldiers. The occupation was marked by an atmosphere of fear and uncertainty, as the Dutch people grappled with the harsh realities of living under a totalitarian regime. The initial shock of occupation quickly morphed into a grim daily existence, characterized by food shortages, curfews, and the pervasive threat of violence. When the Nazis tightened their grip on the Netherlands, they implemented a series of measures aimed at extracting resources to fuel their war machine. The Dutch economy, once a thriving hub of trade and finance, was systematically dismantled. Agricultural produce was requisitioned, factories repurposed for the German war effort, and the banking system came under direct control of the Reich. The once stable financial institutions became instruments of oppression, serving the needs of the occupiers rather than the Dutch populace. Amidst this bleak landscape, the social fabric of the Netherlands began to unravel. The German authorities imposed strict regulations that dictated every aspect of life, from curfews to the allocation of food rations. The Yellow Star, a symbol of the Nazi regime's anti-Semitic policies, became a mark of identification for the Jewish population, who faced increasing persecution and deportation to concentration camps. Neighbors turned against neighbors, as fear and suspicion permeated communities. The Dutch watched helplessly as their friends and family were taken away, often never to return. Yet, in the face of despair, a flicker of resistance began to emerge. While many felt paralyzed by the overwhelming power of the occupiers, a small but determined group of individuals sought to challenge the status quo. Among them was Walraven van Hall, a banker from Amsterdam whose keen financial mind and unwavering integrity would lead him to devise a plan that would strike at the heart of the Nazi war effort. Van Hall's vision was not one of armed rebellion. Rather, he believed that financial sabotage could serve as a powerful weapon against the occupiers. When the occupation progressed, Van Hall's resolve deepened. He recognized that the key to effective resistance lay not in direct confrontation but in strategic subversion. The Dutch populace, though weary and oppressed, was beginning to stir. The seeds of defiance were being sown, and Van Hall was determined to cultivate them into a formidable movement. The resistance prepared for a new form of resistance, one that would challenge the Nazis not with guns, but with cunning and resourcefulness. The German occupation of the Netherlands was a calculated move in the broader context of World War II. Following the swift conquests of Poland, France, and Belgium, the Nazis sought to secure their western flank by subjugating the Netherlands. The strategic location of the country, with its extensive waterways and proximity to Germany, made it a vital asset for the Nazi war machine. The occupation was not merely about control. It was about exploiting the Netherlands' resources to sustain the German military campaign. When the occupation began, the Dutch economy faced an unprecedented crisis. The German authorities imposed heavy taxes and requisitioned agricultural products, leading to widespread food shortages. Rationing became a way of life, with citizens receiving meager allowances that barely sustained them. The black market thrived as desperate individuals sought to obtain basic necessities, often at exorbitant prices. The once thriving cities of Amsterdam and Rotterdam became shadows of their former selves, as the vibrancy of daily life was replaced by a pervasive sense of dread. The social landscape was equally transformed. The Nazi regime implemented a series of racial policies that targeted Jews, Romani people, and other minority groups. The infamous Yellow Star, mandated for Jews to wear, became a symbol of their persecution and isolation. Thousands were rounded up and deported to concentration camps, where they faced unimaginable horrors. The Dutch public, many of whom had previously prided themselves on their tolerance and inclusivity, found themselves grappling with the moral implications of their silence in the face of such brutality. Resistance to the occupation was not an immediate response. It evolved over time as the realities of Nazi rule became increasingly intolerable. Initially, many Dutch citizens felt a sense of helplessness, believing that any form of resistance would be futile against the might of the German military. However, as the occupation deepened and the suffering of the populace grew, pockets of resistance began to emerge. These groups operated in secrecy, often relying on clandestine networks to share information and resources. The logistics of resistance were fraught with challenges. Communication was perilous, as the Gestapo maintained a vigilant watch over suspected dissidents. The resistance had to operate under the constant threat of arrest and execution, which created an atmosphere of fear and mistrust. Yet, despite these obstacles, individuals like Walraven van Hall began to envision a more organized and strategic approach to resistance. Van Hall's background as a banker provided him with unique insights into the financial mechanisms that the Nazis relied upon. He understood that the key to undermining the occupiers lay in disrupting their economic foundations. By exploiting the vulnerabilities within the banking system, he believed it was possible to redirect funds away from the Nazis and into the hands of the resistance. This idea, however, was met with skepticism by many of his peers, who viewed any form of resistance as a dangerous gamble. Undeterred by the doubts of others, Van Hall began to assemble a small group of trusted allies. This network would become the backbone of his financial sabotage operation. Among them were individuals with expertise in finance, as well as members of the resistance who had already demonstrated their commitment to the cause. Together, they began to devise a plan that would exploit the very systems the Nazis believed they controlled. The operation required meticulous planning and an unwavering commitment to secrecy. Van Hall and his team worked tirelessly to establish contacts within the banking sector, seeking out individuals sympathetic to their cause. They understood that the success of their operation depended on their ability to navigate the treacherous waters of deception while maintaining the trust of their allies. Each transaction was a calculated risk, a delicate balance between boldness and caution. As 1943 approached, the groundwork for Van Hall's audacious scheme began to take shape. The Dutch populace, though weary and oppressed, was beginning to awaken to the possibility of resistance. The time was ripe for a new form of defiance, one that would challenge the Nazis not with weapons, but with cunning and resourcefulness. Van Hall's vision of a financial sabotage network was about to become a reality, setting the stage for a remarkable chapter in the history of the Dutch resistance. The summer of 1943 brought with it a heightened sense of urgency for Walraven van Hall and his clandestine network. As their financial sabotage operation continued to gain traction, the Gestapo intensified its efforts to root out resistance activities. The atmosphere in the Netherlands grew increasingly tense, with the occupiers determined to crush any form of dissent. The Gestapo, notorious for its ruthless efficiency, began to focus its attention on the banking sector, aware that it was a potential hotbed of resistance activity. Raids on banks and financial institutions became more frequent, as the occupiers sought to uncover the source of the funds that were fueling acts of sabotage and defiance. The pressure on Van Hall and his team was immense, as they navigated the treacherous waters of deception, knowing that one misstep could lead to their capture and execution. Despite the ever-present threat of discovery, Van Hall and his network remained undeterred. They understood that the success of their operation depended on their ability to stay one step ahead of the Gestapo. To this, they employed a range of tactics to maintain their cover, including the use of coded messages and clandestine meetings held in the dead of night. Each member of the network was acutely aware of the risks involved, yet they continued to work tirelessly, driven by the belief that their efforts could make a difference in the fight against tyranny. The stakes were raised when Van Hall received intelligence about an impending crackdown on suspected resistance activities. The Gestapo had intensified its surveillance efforts, and the network's members were acutely aware that they were being watched. In response, Van Hall and his team accelerated their plans, working tirelessly to finance sabotage operations and provide support to those in hiding. They knew that the longer they could operate undetected, the more they could disrupt the Nazi war effort. As the summer of 1943 drew to a close, the network faced its greatest challenge yet. The Gestapo's net was closing in, and the threat of capture loomed large. Van Hall knew that the time had come to make difficult decisions about whom to trust and how to protect the network from imminent collapse. The stakes had never been higher, and the fate of the Dutch resistance hung in the balance. The tension reached a boiling point when a trusted member of the network was arrested during a routine check. The news sent shockwaves through the group, as they realized that their carefully constructed web of deception was beginning to unravel. Van Hall convened an emergency meeting to assess the situation and determine the best course of action. The atmosphere was heavy with anxiety, as each member understood that the arrest could lead to a domino effect, exposing the entire operation. In the meeting, Van Hall emphasized the need for caution and discretion. "We must adapt," he urged. "Our survival depends on our ability to remain invisible. We cannot afford any mistakes." The team discussed potential contingency plans, including the possibility of creating false identities for key members and diversifying their operations to minimize risk. They knew that the Gestapo's tactics were becoming increasingly aggressive, and they had to stay one step ahead. As the weeks progressed, the pressure continued to mount. The Gestapo's raids became more frequent, and the atmosphere of fear and paranoia was palpable. Van Hall and his team operated with the constant awareness that a single misstep could unravel their entire operation and lead to their capture. Yet, despite the dangers, their resolve never wavered. They understood that their work was not just about money. It was about striking a blow against tyranny and providing hope to a nation under siege. In a desperate attempt to maintain their operations, Van Hall and his network devised a series of diversionary tactics. They created false leads to misdirect the Gestapo's attention, feeding him information about non-existent resistance activities in other parts of the country. This strategy bought them valuable time, allowing them to continue their financial sabotage while keeping the Gestapo occupied. However, the risks associated with these tactics were significant. The team had to operate with extreme caution, knowing that if their deception was uncovered, the consequences would be dire. Van Hall's leadership was crucial during this period, as he instilled a sense of purpose and determination in his team. "We are fighting for our future," he reminded them. "Every day we continue this work is a day closer to liberation." As the summer turned to autumn, the network's activities began to attract the attention of higher-ranking Nazi officials, leading to increased scrutiny and the risk of exposure. Van Hall realized that their operation's success hinged not only on financial acumen but also on the unwavering commitment of his team. Each member of the network was acutely aware of the risks involved, yet they continued to work tirelessly, driven by the belief that their efforts could make a difference in the fight against tyranny. The tension reached a breaking point when Van Hall received word that a high-ranking Gestapo official had taken a personal interest in their activities. This news sent chills down his spine, as he understood the implications of such scrutiny. The network's operations were now under the microscope, and the risk of exposure had never been greater. In response, Van Hall called for a strategic retreat. He ordered the team to scale back their operations, focusing on smaller, less risky transactions that would allow him to maintain a presence without drawing undue attention. The decision was difficult, but Van Hall understood that survival was paramount. "We must be patient," he urged. "The tide will turn, but we must be here to see it." As autumn deepened, the network's activities became increasingly cautious. They focused on maintaining their cover while continuing to support the resistance in more subtle ways. The funds they had already laundered provided a crucial lifeline, allowing the resistance to carry out smaller sabotage missions and support those in hiding. The impact of their efforts was still felt, even as they operated under the shadow of the Gestapo's scrutiny. Despite the challenges they faced, Van Hall and his team remained committed to their cause. They understood that their work was not just about financial sabotage, it was about hope and resilience in the face of oppression. Each day they continued to operate was a testament to their determination and courage. By the end of that year, the network had achieved remarkable success. They had managed to launder an astonishing sum of money, significantly undermining the Nazi war effort. The revelation of their success brought a mix of exhilaration and anxiety. While they had struck a significant blow against the occupiers, they were now more vulnerable than ever to exposure and retribution. The winter of 1943 was marked by a sense of foreboding. The Gestapo's efforts to root out dissent had intensified, and the risk of capture loomed large. Van Hall and his team faced the constant threat of discovery, and the pressure to maintain their operations without detection was immense. Yet, despite the dangers, they remained committed to their cause, driven by the belief that their actions could help turn the tide of the war. As the new year approached, Van Hall knew that the time had come to reassess their strategy. The Gestapo's increasing pressure required a new approach, one that would allow them to continue their vital work while minimizing the risks. The stakes had never been higher, and the fate of the Dutch resistance hung in the balance. In the summer of 1943, the clandestine financial network orchestrated by Walraven van Hall reached a pivotal moment. The audacity of their operations had grown in tandem with their success, and the stakes had never been higher. Van Hall and his team, a diverse group of bankers, resistance fighters, and some disillusioned members of the Dutch National Socialist Party, had managed to siphon an astounding 140 million guilders from under the noses of the Nazi occupiers. This significant sum was a lifeline for the Dutch resistance, enabling them to mount a more formidable challenge against the German war machine. The operation's complexity was a marvel of ingenuity and deception. Van Hall's team had meticulously crafted a web of fake accounts, forged documents, and covert transactions that exploited the very systems the Nazis believed they controlled. They laundered money through legitimate banks, converting it into resources that would fuel the resistance's efforts. The funds were used to finance sabotage missions, support those in hiding, and disrupt German supply lines. The precision of their actions was matched only by their audacity. Each transaction was a calculated risk, a delicate balance between boldness and caution. As the network's success became apparent, so too did the risks. The Gestapo, ever vigilant and increasingly desperate to quash dissent, intensified their scrutiny of financial institutions. The threat of exposure loomed large, casting a shadow over every meeting and transaction. Van Hall and his team operated with the constant awareness that a single misstep could unravel their entire operation and lead to their capture. Yet, despite the dangers, their resolve never wavered. They understood that their work was not just about money. It was about striking a blow against tyranny and providing hope to a nation under siege. The revelation of the operation's scale was both exhilarating and terrifying. Van Hall, a man of quiet determination, found himself at the center of a resistance effort that had the potential to alter the course of the war in the Netherlands. The success of their financial sabotage had not gone unnoticed by the higher echelons of the Nazi regime, and the network's activities began to attract the attention of senior officials. This increased scrutiny brought with it an ever-present danger, forcing Van Hall and his team to remain vigilant and adaptable. Despite the mounting pressure, the network's impact was undeniable. The funds they had laundered enabled the resistance to undertake more ambitious operations, including the organization of a nationwide rail strike that would disrupt German logistics and hinder their ability to transport troops and supplies. The strike, fueled by the financial support of Van Hall's network, was a testament to the power of civilian resistance and a significant blow to the occupiers. As the summer of 1943 drew to a close, Van Hall and his team faced the sobering reality that their success had made them targets. The Gestapo's net was closing in, and the risk of exposure was greater than ever. Yet, despite the dangers, they remained committed to their cause, driven by the belief that their actions could help turn the tide of the war. The revelation of their operations' scale was a testament to their ingenuity and courage, a beacon of hope in a time of darkness. The funds generated by the network were not merely numbers on a ledger, they represented lives saved and futures preserved. The resistance used the money to provide food and shelter for those in hiding, including Jews and other persecuted individuals. The impact of their financial sabotage was felt across the Netherlands, as the resistance became a lifeline for those who had been cast aside by the occupiers. As the autumn of 1943 approached, the network's activities began to evolve. The initial focus on financial sabotage expanded to include direct support for sabotage missions. Van Hall and his team recognized that the funds they had laundered could be used to procure weapons and supplies for resistance fighters, enabling them to carry out more audacious acts of defiance. The network's success had transformed it into a vital component of the broader resistance movement, and the stakes had never been higher. However, the increased visibility of their operations also meant that the Gestapo was tightening its grip. The network's members were acutely aware that their actions were drawing attention, and the threat of exposure loomed larger than ever. Van Hall understood that they needed to adapt their strategies to maintain their effectiveness while minimizing the risks. In response to the growing pressure, the network implemented a series of measures designed to enhance their security. They established new protocols for communication, utilizing coded messages and secure meeting locations to reduce the risk of detection. Each member of the network was trained to be vigilant and cautious, understanding that their survival depended on their ability to remain hidden from the watchful eyes of the Gestapo. By the end of that year, the network's impact on the resistance was undeniable. The funds they had provided enabled the Dutch to mount a more effective challenge against the occupiers, and their actions inspired further acts of defiance. The resistance had become a symbol of hope and resilience, a testament to the power of collective action in the face of tyranny. The revelation of the scale of Van Hall's operation marked a turning point in the resistance movement. The financial lifeline he had created not only sustained the fight against the Nazis but also galvanized a nation to rise up against oppression. The legacy of his ingenuity and bravery would endure long after the war had ended, serving as a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always the potential for defiance and hope. As the winter of 1943 settled over the Netherlands, the resistance prepared for the challenges that lay ahead. The stakes were higher than ever, but so too was the resolve of those who fought for freedom. Van Hall and his network had proven that financial sabotage could be a powerful weapon in the struggle against tyranny, and their legacy would inspire future generations to stand against oppression. As the autumn of 1943 unfolded, the Dutch resistance, buoyed by the financial lifeline provided by Walraven van Hall's clandestine network, began to take bolder actions against their Nazi occupiers. The effect of the funds laundered through the banking system was profound, transforming the resistance from a fragmented collection of disparate groups into a cohesive force capable of executing coordinated and strategic operations. The consequences of this transformation were felt not only in the immediate actions taken against the Nazis but also in the broader morale of the Dutch populace, who were beginning to see glimmers of hope amidst the despair of occupation. One of the most significant consequences of the financial support was the ability to carry out sabotage missions that targeted critical infrastructure. Railways, bridges, and supply depots became prime targets as the resistance sought to disrupt the flow of resources to the German military. The funds allowed for the procurement of explosives and other materials necessary for these operations, enabling the resistance to strike at the heart of the Nazi war machine. Each successful mission was a blow to the occupiers, demonstrating that the Dutch would not be cowed into submission. However, with each act of defiance came the inevitable risk of retaliation. The Gestapo, increasingly aware of the growing resistance activities, intensified their efforts to root out dissent. Raids became more frequent, and the atmosphere of fear permeated every aspect of life in the occupied Netherlands. Van Hall and his network understood that their success had made him targets, and the stakes were higher than ever. The moral dilemmas faced by the members of the resistance were profound. They had to weigh the potential benefits of their actions against the very real risk of exposure and the consequences that could follow. The network's activities also raised questions about the ethics of their financial sabotage. While the funds were being used to support the resistance and provide for those in hiding, the methods employed to launder money often involved deception and betrayal. Some members of the banking community, sympathetic to the resistance, were unwittingly drawn into the web of deceit. Van Hall grappled with the moral implications of his actions, understanding that while the ultimate goal was noble, the means employed could lead to unintended harm. The line between right and wrong blurred in the chaos of war, forcing Van Hall to confront the complexities of resistance in a time of oppression. As the resistance gained momentum, the consequences of their actions rippled through the occupied territories. The German military, increasingly stretched thin by the demands of the war, found itself grappling with a growing insurgency that threatened to undermine their control. The sabotage missions, funded by Van Hall's network, not only disrupted supply lines but also instilled a sense of fear among the occupiers. The realization that the Dutch were willing to fight back began to shift the dynamics of the occupation. The Nazis, once perceived as an invincible force, were now facing a determined and resourceful adversary. The effect of the resistance was felt beyond the immediate actions taken against the occupiers. The financial support provided by Van Hall's network enabled the distribution of food and supplies to those in hiding, particularly Jews and other targeted groups. In a country ravaged by war and suffering from severe shortages, these efforts were a lifeline for thousands. The moral imperative to protect and support the vulnerable became a driving force for the resistance, reinforcing their commitment to the cause. The funds allowed for the creation of safe houses, the organization of escape routes, and the provision of essential resources to those who had been forced into hiding. However, the success of the network came at a steep price. The Gestapo's relentless pursuit of resistance fighters led to the capture and execution of several operatives, creating an atmosphere of paranoia and fear. Van Hall was acutely aware of the sacrifices being made and the lives at stake. Each arrest sent shockwaves through the network, forcing them to re-evaluate their strategies and consider the potential fallout of their actions. The moral dilemmas faced by the resistance members deepened as they grappled with the consequences of their choices. Despite the risks, the resolve of the resistance remained unshaken. The funds laundered by Van Hall's network provided the means to continue the fight, and the spirit of defiance grew stronger. The Dutch people, inspired by the bravery of the resistance, began to rally together. Acts of solidarity emerged, as communities banded together to support one another in the face of oppression. The consequences of Van Hall's financial sabotage extended beyond the immediate impact on the Nazi war effort. They fostered a sense of unity and resilience among the Dutch populace, igniting a collective spirit of resistance. As 1943 drew to a close, the consequences of the resistance's actions were becoming increasingly evident. The financial lifeline provided by Van Hall's network had transformed the landscape of the occupation, empowering the Dutch to challenge their oppressors. The moral dilemmas faced by the resistance members were a testament to the complexities of fighting against tyranny, and the sacrifices made by individuals like Van Hall would resonate long after the war had ended. The turning point had been reached, and the resistance prepared for the final acts of defiance against the Nazi regime. With the dawn of 1944, the Netherlands stood on the precipice of transformation. The tide of the war was shifting, and the efforts of the Dutch resistance, fueled by the financial lifeline provided by Walraven van Hall's network, were beginning to bear fruit. The consequences of their actions were evident in the immediate disruptions to the Nazi war machine and the broader societal changes taking place across the occupied territories. As the Allied forces made significant advances on multiple fronts, the hope of liberation became a palpable reality for the Dutch people. The resistance, now more organized and better funded, was able to undertake increasingly ambitious operations. Sabotage missions targeted key infrastructure, crippling German supply lines and communication networks. The financial support from Van Hall's network allowed for the procurement of more sophisticated tools and resources, enabling the resistance to strike harder and more effectively against their oppressors. The transformation of the resistance was not merely a matter of military effectiveness, it was also a shift in the collective consciousness of the Dutch people. The acts of defiance carried out by the resistance inspired a sense of solidarity and unity among the populace. Ordinary citizens began to see themselves as part of a larger struggle, a fight for freedom and dignity. The moral imperative to resist oppression became a rallying cry, galvanizing communities to come together in support of one another. However, the transformation of the resistance also brought new challenges. The Gestapo, increasingly desperate to quash dissent, intensified their efforts to root out resistance activities. Raids became more frequent, and the atmosphere of fear permeated every aspect of life in the occupied Netherlands. The risk of exposure loomed large, and the members of Van Hall's network faced the constant threat of capture. The moral dilemmas that had haunted them in the past now took on a new urgency. They had to navigate the treacherous waters of deception while remaining committed to their cause. In the face of these challenges, Van Hall's leadership became even more critical. He understood that the success of their operations depended not only on financial acumen, but also on the unwavering commitment of his team. The loyalty of his allies was tested as the stakes grew higher, and the threat of discovery became ever more imminent. Van Hall faced difficult decisions about whom to trust and how to protect the network from imminent collapse. The moral complexities of resistance weighed heavily on him, as he grappled with the consequences of their actions. As the year progressed, the liberation of parts of the Netherlands became a reality. The resistance's efforts, fueled by the financial support of Van Hall's network, played a significant role in these victories. The tide had turned, and the end of the war seemed within reach. For Van Hall and his team, this was a moment of triumph and vindication, a testament to the power of their actions and the resilience of the Dutch people. The transformation of the resistance from a disparate group of dissidents to a coordinated force capable of challenging the Nazi regime was a remarkable achievement. It was a testament to the power of collective action and the impact of Van Hall's financial sabotage. The funds laundered through the banking system had provided the means to sustain the resistance's efforts and support the civilian population. The moral imperative to fight against tyranny had united the Dutch people in a common cause, and the legacy of their bravery would endure long after the war had ended. While the war drew to a close, the aftermath of Van Hall's actions became increasingly evident. The scars of occupation were deep, but the spirit of the Dutch people remained unbroken. Amidst the celebrations of liberation, the contributions of the resistance were recognized and celebrated. The story of Walraven van Hall and his network became emblematic of the courage and resilience of a nation that refused to be cowed into submission. In the years following the war, Van Hall's contributions were gradually recognized. He was posthumously awarded the Dutch Cross of Resistance, one of the highest honors for bravery and service during the occupation. His story became a symbol of hope and resilience, illustrating how one individual's actions could create a ripple effect that inspired collective courage in the darkest of times. The legacy of Van Hall's ingenuity and bravery endures to this day. His actions serve as a testament to the power of civilian resistance in the face of tyranny, a reminder that even in the most oppressive circumstances, there is always the potential for defiance and hope. The story of Walraven van Hall is a powerful reminder of the impact that one person can have in the fight against oppression, and his legacy continues to inspire those who stand against injustice. As the Netherlands rebuilt and moved forward, the memory of the resistance and the sacrifices made by those who fought for freedom remained a vital part of the nation's identity. The story of Walraven van Hall and his network is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring power of hope in the face of adversity. The legacy of Walraven van Hall is not just one of financial acumen or strategic brilliance, but of courage, resilience, and the unwavering belief in the power of collective action. His story is a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always the potential for light, and that the actions of one individual can inspire a nation to rise against tyranny. With the war finally over, the Netherlands began the arduous process of rebuilding. The scars of occupation were deep, but the spirit of the Dutch people remained unbroken. Amidst the celebrations of liberation, the contributions of the resistance were recognized and celebrated. Yet, the full extent of Walraven van Hall's role in the resistance remained largely unknown to the public for years. In the immediate aftermath of the war, the Dutch government sought to document the experiences of those who had resisted the Nazi regime. Many resistance fighters were honored for their bravery, and their stories were woven into the national narrative of liberation. However, the complexities of financial sabotage and the role of individuals like Van Hall were less visible in the public consciousness. The focus was often on armed resistance and direct confrontations with the occupiers, overshadowing the equally vital contributions made through financial ingenuity and strategic planning. Van Hall's actions had not only starved the Nazis of cash, but had also galvanized a nation to resist oppression. His network's financial sabotage provided the lifeline needed to sustain the resistance's efforts, enabling them to mount a formidable challenge against the occupiers. The impact of his work was felt across the Netherlands, from the sabotage missions that disrupted German operations to the food and supplies that sustained those in hiding. The funds he laundered allowed the resistance to operate more effectively, and the morale boost provided by their successes helped to inspire further acts of defiance among the Dutch populace. As the years passed, the Dutch government began to recognize the importance of the financial resistance in the broader context of the struggle against Nazi occupation. In 1946, the Dutch Cross of Resistance was established to honor those who had demonstrated exceptional bravery and service during the war. Walraven van Hall was posthumously awarded this prestigious honor, acknowledging his significant contributions to the resistance movement. The award served as a recognition not only of his financial acumen but also of his courage in the face of overwhelming odds. The recognition of Van Hall's contributions marked a turning point in how the narrative of resistance was shaped in the Netherlands. His story began to emerge from the shadows, illustrating how one individual's actions could create a ripple effect that inspired collective courage in the darkest of times. In the years following the war, historians and authors began to delve deeper into the complexities of the Dutch resistance, highlighting the various forms it took, including financial sabotage, intelligence gathering, and humanitarian efforts. In 1965, a biography of Van Hall was published, shedding light on his life and the critical role he played in the resistance. The book detailed not only his financial operations but also his personal sacrifices and the risks he took to protect his fellow countrymen. This publication sparked renewed interest in Van Hall's legacy, and he became a symbol of hope and resilience for future generations. As the Netherlands continued to grapple with its wartime past, the story of Walraven van Hall served as a reminder of the power of civilian resistance in the face of tyranny. His actions demonstrated that resistance could take many forms, and that financial sabotage was a legitimate and effective strategy in undermining an oppressive regime. The narrative of resistance expanded to include not only armed fighters but also those who operated in the shadows, using their skills and knowledge to challenge the occupiers in less visible but equally impactful ways. In the decades following the war, the Netherlands underwent significant social and political changes. The memory of the occupation and the resistance became intertwined with the national identity, shaping the values of future generations. The story of Walraven van Hall and his network became a vital part of this collective memory, serving as an example of the importance of standing up against injustice and oppression. In 1985, the Dutch government established a National Day of Remembrance for the victims of World War II, known as National Remembrance Day. This day serves as an opportunity for the Dutch people to reflect on the sacrifices made during the war and to honor those who fought for freedom. Van Hall's contributions were acknowledged during these commemorations, and his legacy became a symbol of the resilience and courage of the Dutch people during one of the darkest chapters in their history. As the years turned into decades, the impact of Van Hall's actions continued to resonate. His story inspired countless individuals to stand up against injustice, not only in the context of World War II but also in contemporary struggles for freedom and human rights. The lessons learned from his life and the resistance movement became part of educational curricula, ensuring that future generations would understand the importance of civic engagement and the power of collective action. In 2000, a documentary was produced that chronicled the life of Walraven van Hall and the resistance network he led. The film featured interviews with historians, resistance fighters, and family members, providing a comprehensive look at his contributions and the broader context of the Dutch resistance. The documentary was well received, further solidifying Van Hall's place in the national consciousness and inspiring renewed interest in the complexities of the resistance movement. In recent years, the Netherlands has also seen a resurgence of interest in the history of World War II and the resistance movement. Educational programs and public exhibitions have been developed to ensure that the lessons of the past are not forgotten. Van Hall's story is often highlighted as an example of the importance of moral courage and the need to resist injustice in all its forms. As the Netherlands reflects on its past, the memory of the resistance and the sacrifices made by those who fought for freedom remain a vital part of the nation's identity. The story of Walraven van Hall and his network is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring power of hope in the face of adversity. His legacy serves as a reminder that even in the darkest of times, individuals can make a difference, and that collective action can lead to meaningful change. In conclusion, the legacy of Walraven van Hall is not just one of financial acumen or strategic brilliance, but of courage, resilience, and the unwavering belief in the power of collective action. His story is a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always the potential for light, and that the actions of one individual can inspire a nation to rise against tyranny. The impact of his contributions continues to be felt in the Netherlands and beyond, as his legacy serves as a beacon of hope for those who strive for justice and freedom in the face of oppression.